welcome to this episode of the HR Issue Podcast. And we've been talking about all manner of well-being topics across this season. And this one today is a really interesting topic, I think. It's the link between physical health and well-being and our mental well-being and how those two things intersect. Now, I don't claim to be an expert in either of those things, but I'm very excited that I'm joined today by an expert in hopefully both of those things, Dr. Rebekah Lawrence. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. And with everyone else, I've kind of thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to try and introduce you and tell everyone about all the amazing things that you do. I'm going to let you do that because who knows your story better than you. So just while we get going here, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, what your career is up until this point, and why does this topic in particular of physical well-being and the link to mental well-being, why does that matter to you?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a bit about my journey so far. Well, where I am today, I'm a medical doctor. I work in acute care in the NHS. I'm also a yoga teacher and a breathwork and meditation coach. And that for a lot of people is sometimes a bit of a funny combination. You tend to kind of like be in this medical camp or the wellbeing camp. But for me, the way it kind of started was I was in medical school. And about halfway through, I'd been struggling with mental health for quite a while. But about halfway through, sort of the burnout and the difficulties of diving in such an intense degree kind of just got a little bit too much. And so I was fortunate enough to take some time out of medical school, like completely away from education, and was on a bit of a hunt for, okay, well, you know, the Western medicine, conventional medicine field hasn't really given me what I needed to feel better, even though sort of from the outside, it looked like probably the picture of health. It was a very different story on the inside. And I ended up on an island off the coast of Panama. Okay. Very random. I ended up living with some yoga teachers. And for the first time, I kind of got introduced to what yoga was beyond just like stretching, which I kind of seen in the gym and knew about it in that sense, and got to understand the full picture. And for me, it was transformative and completely elevated how I felt physically, mentally, emotionally. And so I kind of dived in from there and learned a lot more about it. And now it's kind of transpired to me having almost like this dual career of well-being and medicine together for the personal reasons of how it's changed my life, but also how I know it can transform other people's lives as well. And so it's just me trying to share a bit more about that and to help people understand the science behind it too, for why it's so powerful.
Yeah, and when we spoke last week, because we had a brief call, didn't we, ahead of this, you were dialing in live from the hospital. You're in your scrubs. Scrubs, is that what they're called? Yeah, you're in your scrubs. And I was thinking, God, you know, I quite often say to people, we're not saving lives here if someone's complaining about something, but that's literally what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, plus doing this well-being side of things as well. And I think that combination is really interesting. The medicine versus, I guess, the more holistic view of what well-being means. And I guess maybe that's a good place to start. The term well-being is quite a personal experience. If I say the term well-being to you, what jumps out at you as being what it means? What does it mean to you?
I'd say for me, it's more of like a mindset. Okay. So as you said, well-being means something completely different for everyone. And there's so many different ways that you can engage with well-being, that you can practice well-being, and what's going to be perfect for you and work so well for you is going to be completely different for me. So I see well-being more as not the specific thing that you do, but the way you live your life and how much you connect to yourself and understand what you need for your well-being, and then how much you're able to create space in your life to do those things and how you can engage with them.
Love that. Yeah. And everyone I've asked has given a slightly different spin on it, which I guess means that it is such a personal journey that people go on. We've had people talking about connection and state of mind and a sense of kind of peace and that sort of stuff. It means so many different things to different people. I guess the topic we're talking about today is around the link between physical wellness and mental wellness. So why don't we start with your work in the medical field? You mentioned kind of talking about the science behind it. It maybe from a very, treat me as an absolute novice here, and it's a very simplistic thing for me to compute in my head. If we physically treat ourselves well, then mentally that can only be a good thing, and vice versa. If we're not good to ourselves from a physical perspective, that will only have a bad impact on our mental well-being. Is it as simple as that? Talk me through some of the science that sits behind the link between physical and mental well-being.
Yeah, I guess we kind of can make it as simple as that we have this connectedness between our body and our brain. And for the longest time in medicine, we kind of treated them as separate things. And we said, okay, physically you're not well, so we're going to treat that specific symptom and go sort of deep there. Or, okay, there's a mental illness here, so we'll just focus on the mind and we'll medicate and figure out what's going on there without this connectedness between the two. And that's kind of where yoga really opened up my eyes to different ways of thinking around health, because in sort of more holistic and I kind of call it paraclinical areas, there is this cohesiveness between the brain and body, and that completely makes sense. So we know so much about how the body can improve our physical fitness. So when we're running, we improve the function of our heart, of our lungs. When we're doing sort of strength exercises, we engage our muscles more, but there's less of a conversation around the other things that are happening in the body when we exercise. So for example, when we exercise, it can help to improve our sleep cycle, our circadian rhythm. And this is going to improve the way we sleep, and that's going to have a knock-on benefit for our mental health. Also, when we exercise, we release endorphins. So these are chemicals that move around in the body that can help to improve our mood. They're a natural pain reliever. And for example, when we practice yoga, we increase the brain alpha wave activity. So this is associated with feeling relaxed. So there's just so many different things that are going on in the body beyond just our heart, our lungs, and our muscles that help to improve our mental well-being alongside our physical well-being. A key area that I focus on as well is nervous system regulation. So many of us, especially busy Londoners, which is me, we sit in our stress state. So we're constantly being stimulated all the way probably from the minute you get up and your phone starts pinging to the minute you go to bed. And as a result, we do end up stuck in this kind of fight or flight in this stress state. So movement, and particularly sort of gentle exercise, in particular yoga, is where we kind of see more of the research, helps to shift us into this more rest and digest. And that has such positive benefits for things like anxiety, depression, and just generally feeling calm through the day.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've tried to talk about a lot, and I talk about a lot, is preventions in this case has got to be better than cure. So I guess particularly from a medical perspective, when you see patients coming in, I mean, I don't know, you tell me, but a lot of that I would think could have been prevented if better lifestyle choices have been made, or they'd sought care or advice earlier in the process. And it feels to me like, particularly in mental health, and maybe it's the same in physical, we almost let it get to a point that it becomes a problem, and then we try and solve the problem rather than putting good stuff in place to stop it becoming a problem. Do you see that from a yoga perspective, but also from a medical perspective as well?
Oh, definitely. The whole sort of UK Western medical system is very reactive. And I always say, medicine is incredible. Like, we've made so many incredible discoveries. Like, if I get hit by a car, take me to the hospital, don't take me to the yoga studio, because the surgeries we can do, the medications that we have, phenomenal. And, I wouldn't replace that with anything else. But when it comes to our day-to-day health and living optimally and improving the way that we feel, the hospital isn't the place for that. Even GPs, they kind of struggle with that because we know how to react in those places once the symptoms have already arisen. But we, as sort of, going back day to day in our lives, we don't want to wait until we're unwell before we do something about it. We want to know, how do we thrive in life? How do we feel our best? And that comes from things like exercising well, eating the right things, understanding how to regulate your stress so that when you are stressed, you're not making those bad decisions, or you're picking the wrong foods, doing the things that aren't quite right for you, but your environment and your current situation is leading you down that path, which is completely normal and completely human. So one of the areas that I really focus on is that nervous system regulation. How do you connect to yourself in a way that you understand what you need? And then how do you learn the tools so that you can do the right things when you're stressed or when these things aren't quite right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you personalize that for your life as well? Because a lot of us do know the tools, but we don't know how to implement it into our actual day-to-day in the moments that we need.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing, because when life is it's a reasonable and unreasonable at the same time. When life gets so busy and often chaotic, and you got bills stacking up, you've got a to-do list that won't ever get less, you've got family issues, you've got a problem at work, all of these things, the preventative stuff tends to just disappear down the list somewhere, and you kind of forget about it. You kind of just think, I'll come back to that, I'll come back to that, I'll come back to that. Before you know it, you've been sat in front of your computer for 8 hours and you've not gone outside, you've not had any fresh air, you've probably not eaten correctly, you're certainly not drinking correctly. It's so easily done. So I guess translating what we just talked about into the workplace, because a lot of the people listening to this will be HR professionals and HR leaders who might have some influence in their organizations around, how do we set up environments in businesses to help people feel like they can be as physically capable as possible, and the impact that will then have on their productivity and so on and so forth. What can businesses do? What are some really simple things that we could do within organizations to help create spaces where people can be physically the best versions of themselves?
I think one of the most important things that we can do, first of all, is listening to your team and understanding what they need. Because even I have a community that kind of focuses on yoga for people of color. And at the beginning of that, I kind of was deciding, I was like, yeah, we need this. This is what's going to work really well. Everyone's going to love this because I think it's a great idea. And some people did really like it, but I realized after a while, actually, first of all, it's not about me. I kind of know what I need to do and I know it works for me and I can do that anyway. But the most valuable thing you can do is ask your team what they want, what is effective for them, what have they engaged with in the past, because they might even say, oh, we want this, and then no one turns up. You're like, oh, I thought they said they wanted that. What actually do they already do, or what have they done in the past, so you know that it's something they enjoyed? And then how can you implement that in small ways into your workplace? So maybe it's even just, okay, we're doing 5 minutes of breath work at the beginning of this meeting before we get going, and changing this mindset around well-being away from being like, oh, everyone just needs to rest, and to actually, how do we all thrive in this high-pressure environment, and how do we optimize our performance with tools around well-being and recovery? I think that will feed into a workplace in a much more powerful way. And then from there, you can kind of see, okay, well, we have this much space in the office, so let's just have 5 yoga mats on the side and say that from this time till this time, there's a half an hour protected time for people to go in, do a video on a screen, which means that they can just move their bodies for a little bit in the middle of the day. Making it easy for your workplace and for your team to engage with these things is going to have a huge difference.
I think the whole yoga in the workplace thing and similar activities like wellbeing webinars and things like that where people come, I have seen that myself, where we might spend money or time organizing, let's say, an expert speaker to come in, or you bought some yoga mats and some little weights, and you think, right, we think this is going to be a great idea. It's exactly what people need. And then little to no one shows up, to your point. Why do you think that is with things like well-being, particularly physical well-being in the workplace? Is there like a fear? Is there we're not telling the story in a compelling way enough so they understand the why it matters? Is it something different? Why do you think that is?
I do think there's a few reasons for it, which you've definitely touched on a few just there. One of the first things, I was actually chatting to some friends just about well-being at their workplace recently, and one of my friends said she actually just had no idea what was on offer at her workplace. And so that awareness of what's actually available, is that communicated clearly to everyone? And okay, maybe you've sent it out in an email, but if someone's getting 100 emails a day, maybe they haven't actually...
Get missed, yeah.
Maybe it's gone missed. Another thing can be, as I said previously, about the culture of the workplace. Okay, you're putting on this yoga class or this movement session, but actually, are you going to be considered not working hard enough if you go to that session? And if the boss is not advocating for people to attend it, maybe people are going to feel like, actually, my performance review is not going to be as good if I've gone to too many of these lunchtime movement sessions. And finally, it's how accessible is it for your team time-wise? So if you have got a yoga class on at lunchtime, but everyone's actually got meetings through that lunchtime, no one's going to go to the class because people have to be in that meeting. They don't have to be in the yoga class. So can you do protected time for people to attend sessions like that and really be encouraged to attend them and say, we feel like you're investing more in your productivity by taking this lunch break and taking time out to invest in yourself. And that feeds into this positive culture and this positive productivity for the team.
Yeah, and we've talked about exercise a few times here. I think a little bit like well-being, that's a term I think that people have different reactions to. So some people might hear the term exercise and they think, well, that means running a marathon. Or some people think, I've got to join a gym. Or some people think, I've got to lift weights. And all of that could be true. But is there a broader definition of exercise from your either personal or professional experience, which means it doesn't have to be massive. It can just be little things, and those little things add up to something bigger. Like what does that term exercise mean, and how can people take from it what they want to get from it, which is healthy?
So when I talk about physical activity to people, I always think about the intentionality behind that movement. So, say when we're running for the bus, yes, that is technically exercise because we are getting our heart rate up, we're getting our lungs or oxygen moving around the body. But are you creating space in your day to move intentionally based on what you need? So there's so many different ways of moving. Yes, you have the more dynamic forms of exercise where you're really getting your heart rate up and you're kind of getting that circulation moving around the body. But also going for a walk at lunchtime can be a really intentional way to get some movement and exercise into your day. Doing some gentle stretches, even at your desk, and just getting up and doing some twists, doing a bit of movement, that also is intentional. I say physical activity more so than exercise. I think exercise has that kind of connotation of like running a marathon.
Got to be sweaty, out of breath,
being in the gym for an hour, otherwise it's not worth it. I think that mentality can actually stop us from doing movement and exercising, because that mentality of, if I'm not doing X amount, there's no point doing it at all. But actually we say, where can you just bring more physical activity into your day? And that might just be the 10 minutes sort of in your lunch break where you go for a walk around the block and get some sunshine on your face as well. And we can come back to actually, there's so many other benefits to physical activity other than just the exercise element itself. If you're able to take yourself out at lunchtime, maybe you get a bit of sunshine onto your face. That can give you a bit of perspective about how that meeting actually went. You come back a little bit fresher and a little bit calmer than when you stepped out in the first place. I like to encourage people to do sort of exercise snacks.
Okay. I've not heard that before, but go on.
So similar to general snacks. Just these smaller chunks through the day. So it's not always realistic to go to a 60-minute class on something, especially if you have to travel somewhere to go and do it. And as I said, busy Londoners, it's hard to fit it all in. So can you just fit in 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes here? Have these little chunks through your day. And actually, all of that does really add up across your day and your week. And it feels a little bit more manageable as well.
So there's something almost like consistency. Little bits of consistency is better than once every month running a 5K. But actually, if you're doing 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, shorter, less intense things, that's healthier than doing nothing for 3.5 weeks and then do one thing.
Exactly. And we see often when people are doing desk jobs, we end up living just quite a sedentary lifestyle where we're sat at this desk for maybe 8 hours a day. Then maybe you walk to the tube and then you sit down again. You get home and you probably sit down again. And we end up spending pretty much our whole day and week like not really moving much at all. We know that we should be moving our body probably every 30 minutes to an hour across our day. And so can you just bring in a few minutes here and there where you're doing some stretches, you're doing some twists to help with your digestion, you're doing some neck stretches to help that kind of neck tension that maybe is been building up. You're doing a few minutes of deep breathing or putting on a 5-minute breathwork video to help regulate your nervous system. And then you realize, actually, I've been like holding my breath most of the day while I've been doing emails, because that happens naturally. It's something called email apnea. And without doing these little snacks across the day, you can get to that 8-hour mark and not realize that you haven't gotten up and done anything intentionally at all.
And presumably for things like not just life expectancy, but actually the quality of life, doing that sort of stuff will only have a positive impact on your energy levels, on fighting off perhaps different diseases which might be on set by not doing regular movement or that sort of stuff. Do you see that from a medical professional perspective? Is that true?
100%. We see that the chronic lifestyle diseases, things like high blood pressure, diabetes, all of these things are related to how do you live your day-to-day life? How are you engaging with food? How are you engaging with movement? And we don't want to leave it until these things have started happening already before we take action. So all these little things actually contribute to us being healthier, things working much better in our body, and avoid these diseases onsetting later in life. Some things you can't control, there's genetics that are involved as well, but there's little things that we can just do every day and build into our routines and our habits so that we're helping ourselves, not just later down the line, but as you said, how we feel in that moment as well.
Nice. Just touching on a point. So we talked earlier about personalization. So a really, really great point about asking, from a business perspective, asking your employees, what would they benefit from? What kind of things do they find useful or interesting, and kind of spending your money or your resources there. One of the things just kind of layering on top of that I personally struggle with when it comes to physical activity is I tend to go through spurts. Spurts where I'm really all in and I'm going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. I'm like eating really well. And then something will happen. I might get an injury or really busy at work, or I'll go on a holiday and I kind of fall out of the cycle of doing it. And then it becomes a real struggle to pick it back up again and get back into the rhythm of it again. So when it comes to commitment, so not just giving people the resources, but helping them understand and stay committed to it, is there anything we could do better from an organizational perspective, just to encourage people to, I guess, be sticky when it comes to their physical movement?
We all know that we should be exercising. We kind of know the different things that we should probably be doing to keep ourselves well, but helping people to understand the why behind it and a little bit about the science can be such a transformative thing for people, feeling then actually, this is how it relates to my life. This is the changes I'm going to see internally, externally, if I continue doing these things, can make such a difference. I think what you mentioned before about how, sometimes it's going really well, like you're engaging with exercise, you're eating the right things, you're doing all the things that you should do, and you feel amazing for it. But life doesn't always go that way. Life has its own plans sometimes. Different things happen that are outside your control. And sometimes it's just a case of work is really busy. So you're working late, you're not able to make it to the gym, or it's the depths of winter. So you don't want to get up a bit earlier and go for a run in the sunshine because the sunshine's not there.
It makes life much easier when it's sunny, for sure.
Definitely. I'm a sunshine runner,
yeah.
also. Yeah. So understanding what are the different things you can do at those different points of your life as well can make a huge difference. So if you're not able to make it to the gym, or you're not able to meal prep on the weekends, and that's one of the things that you normally do, in those busy periods, what can you do instead? And the workplace being able to offer, say, lunchtime 30-minute movement classes and having protected time for your staff to attend those means that actually that can make a huge difference for that person who's really struggling outside of work or is really overloaded with work to do. Actually, I can't make it to the gym tonight, but I can attend that session in the middle of my day because it's really easy, it's accessible, I don't have to pay extra for it. Things like that can make a huge difference for people.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible piece of advice. We kind of historically, we've talked about protected learning time, for example. How do you help people with their careers? Well, don't make them do it outside of working hours. Maybe we need to switch our thinking slightly when it comes to things like well-being more broadly, and particularly physical well-being. If we can do it within the confines of working hours, so when people go home, they don't have to find the extra hour to go to the gym or to go to that class or to go for a walk. It can be done during the day. All of a sudden, what we then have is a workforce of people who are seeing that their organization really values them, and they can see the value they're putting in physical movement. And of course, who's going to benefit from that? Well, surely that's a win-win for everyone, right? I will win as an employee because I'm going to feel good. I'm going to feel like I can do this within a set period of time. And when I go home, I can go home and I don't have to worry about trying to find more hours in the day that don't exist. But then I'm going to have a more productive mindset. I'm going to, maybe during that lunchtime slump, I'm going to kind of reset and come into the afternoon feeling a little bit more energized. And also what I'm probably going to do is become much more attracted to want to stay at this organization because they're seeing me as a human being, not just an employee. And therefore the organization will have to benefit in terms of people working harder, staying longer, feeling more engaged. And of course, then our customers and our clients will benefit because they're getting a better service. So when you say it all out loud, it's common sense, right? Why on earth would you not do it? But I think it's one of those things, it's just more recently that we're starting to understand more and more, oh, wow, we do employ real human beings, and real human beings with real physical, emotional, social needs. And organizations perhaps need to think a little bit differently about how do we cater for those needs rather than just doing it the way perhaps it's always been done in the past.
Yeah, I think you absolutely just hit the nail on the head there. That obviously businesses and companies have outcomes that they need to achieve. I think that's no secret to anyone. But I do think there needs to be a little bit of a refresh and update in the way of thinking around how we achieve those things. So working your team into the ground all hours of the day, through the night and on weekends is not necessarily going to get you to those outcomes any better than if you say, actually, we're going to prioritize well-being and physical exercise, people's emotional well-being as a tool for how we're going to get to those outcomes as well. And understand that if we have a workforce that feel healthy and feel heard and feel seen around what they need and how they want that to be executed, yes, they're going to be more invested in our company. Then we can maybe do flexible working hours and give them autonomy, which we know, again, is such a key indicator for satisfaction for employees. And then, okay, if we offer lunchtime yoga classes, it's going to improve the way they feel. They're going to still achieve the outcomes that we need because they're committed to what we're all trying to collectively work towards, rather than, worry they're going to just rest all the time and not want to come to work and not want to engage. So changing the mindset of the people who have the power to implement these things into the workplace, I think is just such a key way to then improve the health and happiness of the entire team and company.
Yeah, huge. Yeah, it's huge, right? It can make such a big difference. And I guess perhaps the difference between this world, 2025, as we're recording, and 10 or 15 years ago is there's 10 or 15 years of more research, more testing and learning, more stuff happening around the world that's really shone a light on humanity in a different way than it has been in previous work generations, for sure. And if businesses are just carrying on as if none of that has happened, there has been no evolution in how people want to show up, who they're willing and want to work for, the stuff that's going on at home, then you're just onto a loser, really, because you're not going to survive. To your point, you might work people into the ground, and that might be a very short-term fix to get a project delivered, but actually you're going to have a real long-term problem when no one wants to work for you. Your clients are like, hang on a minute, my account manager keeps changing because people keep leaving all the time, and they're leaving because of stress. They're leaving because of anxiety or underappreciation, something like that. So yeah, it makes it's perfect sense.
And people make mistakes as well if they're tired. That's how, when I work with athletes, injuries happen when you're stressed and tired. If you're in the workplace, mistakes happen when you're stressed and tired. So it's understanding as a team that we're going to perform so much better if we just bring in those small moments of well-being prioritization throughout our day. And coming back to your point of, things have changed so much in the last even decade. I remember before I went to medical school, I was struggling with mental health and didn't really know what it was. I kind of just thought maybe this is just how people feel and it's not very good.
Yeah.
And then it was when I started medical school that I was like, oh gosh, there's a word for these things. There's words like depression, anxiety, which give a term to the things that I've been experiencing and feeling. And I was like, well, luckily I went to medical school, so I got told these things, but not everyone goes to medical school.
No, otherwise you might just accept that's just how I feel.
That's just
what it is.
Exactly. It's just how life is. And this is where we see people really struggling and then not necessarily feel like they could seek help for it because they just think that is how people feel and how life works. And, that was 11 years ago now, and things have changed significantly since then, which is amazing. But some people in companies, if they've been there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, maybe that change hasn't happened internally or externally for them. So I do think there is still so much work to be done, even though things are moving in the right direction. Change does take time, but sort of conversations like this, I'm sure,
will help it along the way. Absolutely. One of the things that's definitely evolved over the last, particularly post-pandemic, has really sped it up is where people work. So we've got lots of people in the office, of course, but we've got lots of people working fully remote, a hybrid of both. Some people might never even meet their teams in person because that's just, they live in a different country or different part of the globe completely. So when it comes to physical well-being, what have you seen any really great practices, or maybe you've got some examples yourself of how organizations can help the people who can't physically be here for a lunchtime yoga class? What can we do more of to reach those types of people?
So I think the pandemic was such an interesting almost experiment of how we have to do things differently immediately and figure out what are these different ways of working, what are the different ways of having these like water cooler coffee moments with our team where we're not allowed to be physically present with each other. And I started doing a lot of online yoga and breathwork sessions for companies during the pandemic so that people could still have that movement sort of offered to them from home. But it's kind of the same principles, really, like having that protected lunchtime and encouraging people to go out, leave their desk, go for a walk, makes such a huge difference, whether you're in the office or you're at home. Supporting your team with access to even it's sort of like apps like Headspace, Calm are such amazing ones that I've used. Obviously, YouTube is there. It's a little bit of a vast abyss of everything.
Yeah, there's a lot on there.
There's a lot on there. So giving people that guidance of actually what are the things that are recommended for them to go to, particular people that you've worked with, whether it's experts that have come in, they've got their own channels. Like I have, videos that I post online as well, which I can direct people to. But being specific with your team around what you'd recommend and why. And say if you're a manager and you're not too sure yourself, bring in an expert to advise you on that and to advise your team, because there's always resources available that can be shared. And if you have got someone who's giving advice that your team resonate with, they'll trust what they're saying as well. So if you're a manager, don't feel like you are pressured to have all the answers yourself. Outsource that to people who really do know.
Yeah, I guess just a follow on from that, perhaps in a similar vein, managers and potentially HR people, when it comes to physical activities, we've got to consider other things as well. So we've got to think about neurodiversity, physical disabilities, that sort of stuff. But again, those are conversations that managers either might shy away from or they don't think about. They just say, let's do this particular thing, but actually that excludes a load of people for different reasons. So in that space of making it much more accessible, what's your kind of best practice in terms of making sure that we're including everyone?
Yeah, that's such a good point to touch on. And I think, again, it does come back to you have to speak to your team to understand, because we all have our assumptions based on what we're seeing on the outside to then what people are able to do. And it's always often a different case behind the scenes. I understand those conversations are hard, but again, if it doesn't feel right for you to have that conversation, I'm sure there's someone else that either you can bring in to have those conversations or someone else on the team who feels better placed to do so. But having a diversity of activities or offerings for your team is one of the best ways to approach it as well. So, okay, maybe we keep coming back to a yoga class. That's not the only thing you can do, but it's an easy example to give. But also having a lunchtime walk or having chair-based movements as well, or offering one-to-one quiet time for people, because sometimes doing stuff in a group can feel really overstimulating and overwhelming, particularly if someone's got autism, for example. So a diversity of offerings. Take the time to listen to your team to understand what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what they've engaged with in the past that they've enjoyed. Those things together can make a huge difference.
Nice. And do you think there's anything in competition? So let me give you an example. So one of the products we have here is called the Wellbeing Plus app. And it allows you to track your steps. You can enter leaderboards against your colleagues, see who's cycled the furthest. Is there something in that about if there's an opportunity to create a bit of healthy competition and get people moving with either pride as the prize or an actual prize? Do you think that makes a difference as well?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. You competitive?
It comes out.
Okay.
I practice a lot of yoga, which is obviously not a competitive thing at all, but I have my fair share.
Yeah.
And I just think anything which gets people excited and also creates this cohesiveness between the team, it gives people something to talk about. If you're doing something which involves, different teams and they're working together on that, it can just be fun. It can be as simple as that it's a way for people to enjoy themselves and Get to know other people as well, because they both engage in that one thing. You're learning different people's names, and if there are some fun prizes there as well, I don't think that ever hurts. Anything to get people motivated and inspired and excited.
Yeah, and of course, what you're then doing is, if you talk about different levels of well-being intersecting with each other, you're creating a space for people to connect on a social level. And if someone was feeling lonely or isolated, or they were struggling to bond with people over anything other than just work, then all of a sudden they've got this additional thing that allows them to feel connected, allows them to feel like they're part of something. And we know that social well-being and loneliness and isolation has a huge factor on people's mental well-being as well. Because to your point, they all intersect, don't they? If you're feeling physically unwell or unable or tired or lack of energy, that's going to have a knock-on impact on your mood. And that might mean you then cancel your social plans, then you're annoyed at yourself for doing that. And it's kind of a bit of a spiral, isn't it? So actually those things, if we focus on them and understand they don't happen in isolation, they're all intrinsically linked in some way or another. That's a good way to think about it. So it's not just random, it feels deliberate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we know that the social connectedness is one of the key benefits of exercise as well, but one of the additional benefits of exercise. And in London, we've seen this huge boom in like run clubs, for example, and these communities around physical exercise coming up. And that's because loneliness is a huge thing in London. Like, you're around so many people all the time, but how many people are you really connecting with on a slightly deeper level? So coming back to the diversity in offerings, having these kind of little competitions and stuff like that can make a huge difference, but also being aware that not everyone is going to thrive in that particular environment. So yes, 100% put them on, see if it works for your team, but also have other things alongside it for those people that are maybe a little bit more introverted and don't feel like they want to be a part of that, but also don't want to feel like they've been left out of that conversation around physical movement.
Well, going back to the physical movement then, you talked a lot about yoga, which I know is clearly a passion for you, and breath work. So for our listeners who might be thinking, oh, I know what yoga is. I know there's so many different variants, right? I see so many different posters offering different types of yoga. What is your kind of take on yoga? Why is it a good thing to do? I'm sure there's different versions of it for different people. It's not just a one-size thing that people might be a bit frightened of. Tell me a little bit about yoga and why that's a great thing.
So yoga, for me, has been so transformative and powerful because it's not just about movement. Sometimes it's not about movement at all. Yoga is so broad, but also so deep in the sense that you have all these different styles of movement. So you have the kind of end of the very dynamic, very physically challenging sides, all the way through to the styles of yoga where you basically just lie down and it's almost like you're sleeping and we just lie on bolsters and pillows. That's sort of a restorative yoga. So I teach actually both of those things, the more dynamic styles and then the restorative styles as well. And exercise is incredible. But what I found with yoga is that it gives you that opportunity to tune back in with yourself. So to really understand how you're doing. What is your body telling you? So often our brain is like, okay, I need to do this. I've got this task. This is urgent. Da, 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 da. There's a lot of busyness in the mind. Yoga has a simplicity of rolling out your mat, taking a moment to sit, to ask yourself that question of, how am I doing today? What do I need? What is my body telling me? Where am I feeling tension? What is my breath telling me? And our breath is this beautiful interface between our unconscious control. You know, we don't need to think about our breath. We just breathe all day, but also our conscious control. So I can take deep breaths in and out. I can choose to breathe in a particular way. And that is the window into our nervous system. And that is the truth about how we are really doing. So if I have a very short and shallow breath, which most of us busy adult Londoners do, that is a clear sign that you are in your stress state, that you're in your fight or flight. And it's when I sit down on the mat and I practice yoga that I start to slow down my breath. And I start to really tune into my body. I understand how I'm doing. And from there, I then move into probably a physical practice where I get this benefits of strength building, working my muscles. I can get this cardiorespiratory benefit as well if I'm doing a more dynamic practice. But I also am moving in all these different planes. I'm going upside down, I'm moving side to side. And you don't really get that. Say if you're running, you're very much just like moving in one plane. And it can be amazing and have loads of benefits, but a lot is getting left out. And then when I do a yoga class, we always end with something called Shavasana at the end, which is basically just where we lie down or sit upright and we just have a few minutes of complete stillness, just again to tune back in before you carry on the rest of your day. And we often don't get that with a fitness class. So exercise can kind of rope you up a little bit and stimulate you, which again can have loads of benefits, but we know that we need to also come back down. We need to rebalance our nervous system before we then carry on with what we're doing. So for me, yoga has all those benefits, but then you also have the history and the philosophy elements. So we talk a lot about sort of the ethical principles of how you can then live your day, how you treat yourself, how you treat other people. And it's just this really beautiful world of nourishing goodness. And for me, like combining that with the science and the medical aspects and how that actually then benefits my short-term and long-term health, it just blows my mind.
And, if anyone listening to this is thinking, God, that sounds really interesting, I'd love to give it a go, I guess it doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to sign up to a gym or classes. You don't even have to leave your lounge. You could jump on a YouTube video or something quite easily and just try it out in the comfort of your own home, couldn't you? And see if it's for you in the first place. Exactly.
And for me, one of the beautiful things about yoga as well is that it can be movement, doesn't need to be. It can be an hour, it can be 1 minute, 30 seconds. There's so many different aspects of it, from the meditation to the breath practice to the actual poses, which are called asanas. So I would say that I practice yoga every day, but that doesn't always look like me rolling out my mat and doing something. For example, last night I had a super busy day. I ended up working a little bit late, which I know for me really affects my sleep. So I did about, I think it was like a 6 minute, because I play a particular track on Spotify. Okay. And I just did some deep breathing and some particular breathwork techniques that I know work really well for me to wind me down before bed. And that is a yoga practice as well. I was actually just lying on my bed doing it. There was no sort of big movement or having to go anywhere involved. And it can be so accessible in that sense and so easy to engage with, because there's not necessarily any cost involved. As you said, you can literally jump onto YouTube and watch a video for free anytime, anywhere. So it can just be a great place to start.
And I think that's probably a nice segue as we start to wind down here. I've been asking everyone, what is the 1 or 2 things that you do as a person that really helps you operate at your very best? And feel free to kind of mention what you've already mentioned, or if there's anything else that you think our listeners would be really fascinated to hear, then go for it. What's your thing that makes you thrive?
Definitely yoga, which you probably guessed.
I thought you might say that, yeah.
And as I kind of touched on, it's the ability to understand, how do I use the tools of this practice in different situations, in different places, to get the outcome that I want. So before I'm about to give a talk, I have particular breathing techniques that I'll do before then and I know they're effective. I do them all the time. I know the science behind why they work, or before I go to bed, or when I wake up in the morning. And so for me, it's always about building up my toolbox of what I can use and when I can use it in different scenarios, depending on how I'm feeling. And it does always come back to connecting to yourself to understand how you're feeling in that moment in time, what you need, and then having the tools and the space to implement those things. So alongside yoga, I love to go for a little run, especially in the sunshine. I'm not a marathon runner, so I don't claim to be a big runner, but, love me a 3K.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And then going to the gym as well to do strength training. So I always advocate for having this balance across different forms of movement. All of them are incredible, but you do need to balance the different styles to get the most benefit.
Love that. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from listening to you. I know our listeners will have done the same thing as well. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And actually, just from me to you, thank you for all that you do from a medical perspective as well. I know being a doctor is a really tough place. So balancing all of that with everything else you do, kudos to you. Thank you for joining us on the HR Issue podcast. It was great to chat.
Thank you so much for having me.